There's a kind of courage that looks like madness and a kind of reason that is, in the end, nothing but the fear of looking into the abyss without a formula to explain it away. Lev Shestov spent his entire philosophical life making a single accusation. That Western thought, from Socrates to Husserl, had committed the most sophisticated act of cowardice in human history. It had traded the living, terrifying God of Abraham for the safe, predictable God of the philosophers, and called it progress. This video traces a single quarrel between Athens and Jerusalem through the work of a thinker most have never read. Two questions will haunt what followed. First, can reason itself become a form of cowardice, a way of making the unbearable bearable by declaring it necessary? Second, what would philosophy look like if it began not in wonder, as Aristotle claimed, but in the cry of a man who has lost everything and refuses to be consoled? Lev Schwarzmann was born in 1866 in Kiev, into a prosperous Jewish merchant family. His father traded in textiles. Nothing about the household predicted what the son would become. He studied law and mathematics at Moscow University. He was sharp, methodical, entirely conventional. The man who would assault reason spent his youth training in it. And then something broke. In the mid-1890s, Shestov suffered a profound personal crisis, the details of which he never fully disclosed. What is known is that it was total. His health collapsed. He could not sleep. He wandered through European sanatoriums, Switzerland, Italy, Germany, seeking rest that would not come. But something else happened during those years of collapse. He began to read Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, not as literature, not as philosophy, but as diagnosis. In The Underground Man's Spite, in Nietzsche's assault on morality, Shestov recognized something that academic philosophy refused to see: the sound of a human being screaming under the wheel of necessity. His first major work, published in 1898, carried a telling title, Shakespeare and His Critic Brands. But it was not really about Shakespeare. It was about the gap between what a thinker experiences and what his system permits him to say. Shestov had found his theme, and he would never abandon it. Consider what this means. Here is a man who did not arrive at philosophy through curiosity. He arrived through catastrophe. And the catastrophe taught him something that curiosity never could. It taught him that when a man falls far enough, the truths that were supposed to hold him, reason, logic, the eternal verities, are revealed to be chains, not foundations. In 1905, he published All Things Are Possible, a book of aphorisms so corrosive that it scandalized even those who thought they had outgrown scandal. In it he wrote, "The business of philosophy is to teach man to live in uncertainty, not to reassure him, but to upset him." Imagine the audacity of that sentence in 1905. Every philosopher since Plato had promised certainty. Shestov promised the opposite. He promised to take certainty away, and he insisted this was a gift. But a gift from whom? And at what cost? That question would drive the next 3 decades of his thought, and lead him to the most ancient quarrel in Western civilization. Athens and Jerusalem. The phrase has been used so often it has become a cliché, but Shestov meant something precise by it, something most people who cite the phrase have never grasped. Athens, for Shestov, was not merely Greek philosophy. It was any system of thought that begins with self-evident truths and derives everything else from them. 2 + 2 = 4. A thing cannot both be and not be at the same time. The past cannot be undone. These are the pillars. Shestov wanted to topple every one of them. Not because he was irrational, not because he denied mathematics, but because he saw what those pillars demanded of the human being who accepted them. They demanded submission. If 2 + 2 necessarily equals 4, then necessity rules. And if necessity rules, then freedom is an illusion. God is impotent, and suffering is final. Ask yourself, do you accept that? Most people do without thinking. We call it realism. Shestov called it the deepest form of spiritual surrender. Jerusalem, by contrast, was the tradition that began not with axioms, but with a voice. A voice that spoke to Abraham and said, "Leave everything and go." Not a syllogism, not a proof, a command that made no rational sense and was obeyed anyway. That, for Shestov, was the birth of a different kind of knowing. Now the obvious objection. You might say, this is just fideism, blind faith against clear reason. Shestov heard that objection 1,000 times. His answer was devastating. Reason, he argued, is not neutral. It does not merely describe what is, it legislates what must be. And in doing so, it forbids the one thing the suffering human being needs most. Hope. Hope, not optimism. Shestov despised optimism. But the wild, unreasonable hope that what has happened might somehow be undone, that the past is not final. He pointed to Job, not the job of the theologians, who learns patience and is rewarded. The real job, the one in the text, who screams at God and refuses every consolation his friends offer. Job's friends are Athens. They explain his suffering. They give reasons. They tell him, this is just, this is necessary. Accept it. And Job says, no. That refusal, that raw, unphilosophical, unjustifiable no, is the beginning of everything Shestov cared about. Not because it is rational, because it is human. Or human. He compared Job to Spinoza, and the comparison is vicious. Spinoza, who declared that we must understand things sub specie aeternitatis, under the aspect of eternity. From the aspect of eternity, Shestov noted, every individual death is insignificant. Every particular suffering dissolves into the universal order. Spinoza's God does not hear prayers. Spinoza's God, Shestov wrote in Athens and Jerusalem, is bound by his own nature. He cannot do otherwise than he does. Is such a God truly God, or merely the universe admiring itself? What kind of comfort is it to tell a mother whose child has died that the death was necessary? That it followed from the eternal order? That 2 plus 2 equals 4 and nothing can be done? Shestov's answer, that is not comfort. That is the final cruelty. And the philosopher who offers it has revealed what he truly worships. Not truth, but order. But if reason is a tyrant, then what stands against it? What weapon does the individual have against the entire tradition of Western philosophy? Shestov had one answer, and he never wavered. Faith, but not faith as belief. Not faith as accepting doctrines. Faith as what Kierkegaard called the leap. The absurd, terrifying act of trusting what reason forbids. Shestov found in Kierkegaard a brother across a century. Both had suffered. Both had arrived at the same impossible conclusion, that the highest act of the human spirit is not understanding. It is defiance. In his 1936 work Kierkegaard and the Existential Philosophy, Shestov laid out the argument at its most extreme. God, he claimed, is not bound by the laws of logic. God can make what has been not to have been. The past, which reason declares irrevocable, is for God an open question. Socrates was poisoned. Can God undo that? Reason says no. Logic says no. Every philosopher since Aristotle says no, doubt, doubt. And Shestov says, that is precisely the problem. You have built a God too small to be God. Now, you may resist this. You may say, This is madness. No serious thinker can claim that the past can be undone. But notice what you are doing when you say that. You are appealing to necessity. You are saying, it cannot be otherwise. And Shestov's entire philosophy is the question. Who told you that? Who decided what can and cannot be? Not God, Shestov argued. Reason? Reason told you that. And reason is not a neutral observer. It is a legislative power that has seized the throne and declared itself sovereign. He returned again to Pascal. Another thinker broken by experience, another refugee from the comforts of pure mathematics. Pascal's memorial reads, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and scholars. Shestov quoted that line more than any other in all of Western literature. For him it was a battle cry. The God of Abraham does not explain suffering. He enters it. The God of the philosophers explains suffering away. He absorbs it into the system. He tells you, this was necessary. Be consoled by understanding. And Shestov replies, understanding is the disease, not the cure. What does it mean to read this and feel relief? Because many readers do. They encounter Shestov's fury against reason and they feel, for the first time, that someone has named the thing they could not name. The thing that was wrong with all the consolation. The thing that made every rational explanation of suffering feel like a second injury. Shestov gave it a name. The tyranny of self-evidence. But this raised a problem that even Shestov's admirers could not ignore. If faith opposes reason, and reason governs everything we can say, then faith, by definition, is silent. It cannot argue for itself. How do you write a philosophy of what cannot be philosophized? This paradox did not trouble Shestov. It delighted him, because paradox, he believed, was the native language of truth. In 1921, Shestov left Russia permanently and settled in Paris. He would spend the rest of his life there, teaching, writing, and engaging in one of the most extraordinary philosophical friendships of the 20th century. Edmund Husserl, the founder of phenomenology, met Shestov in 1928 at a conference in Amsterdam. By all accounts, they liked each other immediately, and they disagreed about everything. Husserl believed that philosophy must be a rigorous science, that consciousness itself could be mapped with the precision of mathematics. He called this phenomenology's founding ambition. Shestov saw in this project exactly what he had been fighting his entire life. Athens triumphant, reason colonizing even the inner life. The last territory of the human soul being mapped and annexed. Their letters are remarkable. Two men of deep intelligence and mutual respect, talking past each other with perfect clarity. Each understood what the other meant. Each believed the other was profoundly wrong. Shestov wrote to Husserl, "You want to make philosophy into science. But science is precisely what killed the living truth and replaced it with a corpse that can be measured." Husserl, for his part, could not understand why Shestov would not submit his insights to rigorous examination. "If your faith is true," he reportedly said, "it should survive scrutiny." And Shestov's reply, implicit in everything he ever wrote, "Scrutiny is the instrument of the executioner. You do not submit the living to autopsy." In 1938, both men were dying. Husserl, stripped of his academic position by the Nazis, lay ill in Freiburg. Shestov, weakened by illness, was fading in Paris. Shestov sent a final message to Husserl through a mutual friend. He asked whether Husserl, now stripped of everything by history's cruelty, still believed that reason was sovereign. Whether the self-evident truths had held, whether the man who had mapped consciousness with such precision had found, at the end, that the map was enough. The answer, if there was one, did not survive. Husserl died in April 1938. Shestov died 5 months later, in November. Neither man conceded. And perhaps that is the most honest outcome of any real philosophical disagreement. Not resolution, not synthesis. Two men going into the dark, each holding the thing they trusted most. What happened to Shestov after he died? The same thing that happens to most philosophers who refuse to build systems. He was forgotten. Existentialism rose. But it was Sartre's existentialism, Heidegger's existentialism, secular, systematic in its own way. Shestov's faith-driven revolt did not fit the mold. He was too religious for the atheist, too irrational for the theologians, too literary for the analytic philosophers, and too philosophical for the poets. He belonged nowhere, which is exactly what he would have wanted. But the question he posed has not been answered. It has only been ignored. And ignored questions do not disappear. They wait. Consider the world you live in now. A world that has more information than any civilization in history, and less capacity to sit with uncertainty. Every question demands an answer. Every suffering demands an explanation. And when the explanation comes, do you feel consoled? Or do you feel what Shestov described? A second injury, quieter than the first, but deeper. The injury of being told that your suffering makes sense, that it was necessary, that it could not have been otherwise, that you should understand, and in understanding, accept. Shestov would say to you, the acceptance they are asking for is not wisdom, it is capitulation, and the understanding they offer is not knowledge, it is anesthesia. Is he right? That question, whether reason is a gift or a cage, has not been settled by 25 centuries of philosophy. It may never be settled, but Shestov did something that matters more than settling it. He refused to let the question be closed. Wow. Every generation of philosophers tries to seal it, to prove once and for all that reason and faith have been reconciled, that Athens and Jerusalem have made peace. And Shestov, from his grave, says, no, they have not. The quarrel is alive. The God of Abraham is not the God of Spinoza, and the cry of Job will outlast every system built to silence it. Remember the two threads. Can reason become cowardice? Shestov spent 40 years arguing that it already has, that every philosopher who explains suffering instead of protesting it has chosen comfort over truth. And what would philosophy look like if it began in despair rather than wonder? It would look like Shestov's work, broken, furious, unfinished, alive. A wound that refuses to heal because healing would mean forgetting. He did not defeat reason. He did not prove God.